Well, as you may well be aware of already, Parliament has started debating the Finance Minister's address to the House on plans and policies put in place by government in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. John Jinapo, Member of Parliament for Yapekusong, says President Akufo-Addo's commitment to raising money to deal with COVID-19 should begin with him cutting down on the number of ministers. He says Ghanaians cannot be tightening their belt with more than 100 ministers and that the minority will resist attempts to dig into the Heritage Fund. Our Parliamentary Affairs correspondent Joseph Opoku-Gakpo joins us live from Parliament with more. Hello, Joseph. Joseph, if you do hear me, let's start with a summary of the plans outlined by the minister as far as the pandemic is concerned.
So if you can hear me, the Finance Minister just finished his address to Parliament, and a number of MPs have been debating the issues as he outlined. He's been giving some disclosures on how badly COVID-19 will hit the Ghanaian economy going forward and what is being done in order to help deal with the situation. Just to run you through bits and pieces of that, when it comes to revenue shortfall that the nation is expecting, he indicated that as a result of the COVID-19, in the 2020 fiscal year, about 2.2 billion Ghana cedis will be lost. And he broke that down, that out of that amount, tax revenue to the tune of 1.4 billion when it comes to non-oil tax revenue will be lost. And then import duties to the tune of 108 million Ghana cedis will be lost. When it comes to the money that's coming as what they call the annual budget funding amount with oil, an amount of 3.5 billion will be lost. When it comes to money that's going into the Stabilization and the Heritage Funds, 1.85 billion and 400 million respectively will be lost. So those are some of the projections that he's been giving. He's been indicating that the projected growth of GDP, which was around 6.8%, is being cut to somewhere around 2.2%. And if the lockdown is implemented for a longer period of time, then that may come down even further to a figure around 1.5%. So those are some of the details in the game. But he says a number of measures are ongoing to cushion the economy. He, for example, disclosed that the said 1 billion that's coming as stimulus package, they've identified the source of that money already, which is the Stabilization Fund that is as a result of the oil revenue. That's the money that they'll be using. He says last week, Friday, an amount of 300 million Ghana cedis was released to the National Health Insurance Scheme for the purpose of paying off medical facilities and to give them the necessary liquidity to help the nation in these difficult times. And he's also been outlining a number of measures. But one thing that he said that's been drawing quite some response is the disclosure that in the effort to deal with this particular situation, the sources of funding are as follows. They are getting about $550 million US from the International Monetary Fund, about $100 million from the World Bank, and another $350 million credit facility additionally from the World Bank in order to cushion the economy, as well as the indication that the other sources include the Heritage Fund as well as the Stabilization Fund. Now, the bit about the Heritage Fund is drawing quite some response from the minority members of Parliament. Let me have a quick conversation with Emmanuel Amakofi-Boa. He is the former Minister for Petroleum in this Republic. Honorable Boa, thanks very much for joining us. So we all heard from the Minister for Finance. The shortfall in terms of revenue on the economy, in the economy broadly, is around 2.2 billion as a result of COVID-19. Among the efforts to deal with the problem is them tapping into the Stabilization Fund, the Heritage Fund, the IMF, the World Bank, and others. Your reaction? Are these good enough measures as we heard him tell
we are
Parliament?
In a very serious crisis, and I don't want anybody to underplay where we find ourselves. I think it's not only peculiar to Ghana, across the globe. And it is really, really a time for us to have a sober reflection on what is happening and to look at what we do to really. It is very, very true that the growth figures are going to be reversed. He talked about 2.2, a projection of 6 dropping down to 2.2. It probably could even go worse. Probably be negative. And in terms of the revenue projection, it is very clear that we are not going to be there. So it is really right for the minister to be making certain projections and looking at what do we need to do. Before this medical crisis, pandemic, we had all sorts of things planned. We wanted to spend 800 million almost on the Electoral Commission new register. We wanted to do all sorts of projects, all sorts of long-term infrastructure projects. This is really the time for government to sit down and look at the bigger envelope and look at the options. It is when we do that that I will begin to be comfortable. For example, the Stabilization Fund was set up purposely for emergencies. Clearly, for the minister to talk about really doing some adjustment to rein in more money from the Stabilization Fund, I think is important. I do not believe that we've done the analysis enough to even be talking about the Heritage Fund.
You think that should be an out of place, no one should touch that?
Remember the basis for the Heritage Fund. The basis for the Heritage Fund was that we that are living today are dealing with a finite oil resource that is going to be depleted. And so the generations yet unborn something must be left for them. The question I have is that, are we at that point where we've exhausted all our options? Why didn't the minister talk about some of the things we plan to do and say that because of the emergency, we are putting a stop to it? Are we putting a stop, for example, to the almost 800 million new machines for the Electoral Commission? Are we really adjusting certain numbers, government expenditure, other infrastructure projects? We need to do.
He said, for example, they are adjusting expenditures on goods and services downwards by up to 1.2 billion Ghana cedis, and an indication that in terms of regular expenditure, something is being done about.
He's coming to the House tomorrow for us to do the analysis. And I'm trying not to be political, but seriously, I am not convinced, and the minority members are not convinced, as I stand here, that we should go and rein in on the Heritage Fund. I think we can look at the Stabilization Fund and all the other options, including government tightening its own belt and basically doing things for Ghanaians to know that we are really, really in a state where we are. I do not believe we are there where we can talk seriously about the Heritage Fund.
So that if up to 1 billion is getting to businesses as stimulus packages and other
numbers, I think we need to look at those numbers. I've given you some examples. I've given you other options. Let's look at the numbers. We accept we have to really protect the Ghanaian. For example, the address that was made, there were a lot that, for example, I expected the ministers to say. There's so much vulnerable in our society that we must support at this point. So many of our people, more than 20% that we must support. What are we doing to support them? These are very critical.
And these are not assurances you think you got from what the minister
I think the minister was a little short on some of the details that I wanted to hear. But I think that he's coming back to the House tomorrow for us to look at the numbers, and that's very, very important. But I believe that we must begin the discussion from where I started, looking at all the other expenditure we had projected, looking at our circumstances, and basically say that these are all expenditure we wanted to do. We've suspended that because of our crisis, before we can even think about other things. But the Heritage Fund should be the last thing we think about.
Many thanks for joining us. Emmanuel Amakofi-Boa is the MP for Elembele. He's also the former Minister for Petroleum. A number of other issues came up on the floor, even as the Minister for Finance raised the issues. For example, the Minority Leader, Haruna Idrisu, was of the opinion that the Finance Minister should necessarily just have gone ahead and done a review of the 2020 budget, instead of just delivering a statement to members of Parliament and expecting that the House would debate that and subsequently come with requests for specific approvals on specific issues. That's one of the issues that the Minority Leader put across, and then he reiterated the point by the minority that they will not support any expenditures on the Heritage Fund, even as government tries to deal with this particular crisis. Again, the minority MPs are saying that if government is really committed to dealing with this problem, the first item on the agenda he should be tackling is the number of ministers that he actually has. The president should cut down on the numbers. As far as they are concerned, there's been very huge burden of the national purse as a result of the 114 or so ministers. And so they think that once the finance minister is asking Ghanaians to tighten their belts and put in the necessary efforts, and people are losing their jobs and steps are being taken to address that, he would want to see a situation where the number of ministers are actually reduced. So the House debated the statement by the minister for close to 30 minutes, and now sitting has adjourned as MPs go on to do other businesses. The finance minister is expected on the floor of Parliament tomorrow to lay out some specifics. But again, a little later this evening, we are expecting that on the specific issue having to do with about $35 million that's been expected from the World Bank, you know, government laid the request for that particular
Joseph, before we go to the 35 million
to Parliament for that particular document on the floor earlier on Saturday. We are waiting for the House to debate that a little later this evening.
All right. Well, Joseph, I almost interrupted you with the fact that before we even get to talk about the 35 million and that approval that comes with it, the calls by the minority, though, about the number of ministers, if you look at the amount of money that the world needs to deal with this problem, it looks as if looking at the number of ministers in governments right now is inconsequential, even if you have to cut down on it. But the minority makes a strong point about spending, for example, on a new voters register, especially when so many people, including civil society organizations, have indicated we don't need to spend money on that. Did the majority respond to these issues they've raised about how much we're spending, for example, on a new voters register when this came up?
In terms of specifics, when it comes to the amount of funding at the level of government that they hope to cut, that wasn't exactly given, except that the minister did put out a blanket figure that they're hoping to cut down on expenditure on goods and services, generally at the level of government machinery, by more than 1.2 billion Ghana cedis. And that is one of the key measures that they are taking in order to be able to virtually raise enough resources and avoid wastage as one of the measures to help raise more money to shore up the economy in order to deal with the COVID-19 problem and the impact on the economy. These are questions that at the level of the Finance Committee, as they debate the specifics and all, we are expecting will emerge, and that just maybe the Finance Minister may provide those additional details to MPs.
And help me understand this, Joseph. A lot of us have been under the impression that the Finance Minister was coming to Parliament with some sort of stimulus package, which is something we've seen people do around the world since COVID-19. Can we describe this as a stimulus package, and really what's in it, for example, for businesses?
So what he did was to announce the package in question to MPs and indicate that going forward, they are expecting that he would return with the specifics on what the stimulus package would look like. And the minority in Parliament have particularly been making the point to the Finance Minister that they'll be paying very close attention to how that stimulus package will be disbursed, because they want to see all Ghanaians benefit from it and not necessarily just people who are affiliated to the government. So the details on those specifics are things which will actually be rolled out from tomorrow going. But Gifty, maybe we could get a response to that particular question as well from some majority MPs. Katie Hammond, who is the Member of Parliament for Adansia Sokwa, is joining us. He's a former Deputy Minister. Let's begin the conversation from, first of all, the issue having to do with the Heritage Fund, and then we could get broadly into the other issues. Do you subscribe to the idea by the Finance Minister that it's one of the options being considered in order to shore up the economy, even with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is becoming a big issue here in Ghana? I can see you are trying to avoid getting too close because of social distance, but please do, please do, please do. Please do.
Closer? Oh,
it's because the camera is fixed here. So Heritage Fund, should we be using that?
It was a bad idea to start with, to set up the Heritage Fund. It was a bad idea. From day one, I spoke against it. Look, we go around scratching around literally a few millions by way of loans and all that. I have been asking the question since day one. Why do we want to put that much money in investment for posterity? I mean, when that investment is yielding next to no dividend, so the money is static. Well, the last count it was, I think, some 80 million or whatever. I'm not sure what the figure is as at now. I'm asking, we raised 10 million loan, we raised 20 million loan, nothing is in there. Posterity, develop the country for the benefit of posterity. Don't leave the money sitting in the account for the benefit of posterity. What are they going to do with 80 million, 100 million by the time that we're talking about without the benefit of income, dividend on it, will be absolutely nothing.
So for you are for an idea of digging even into that right now to deal with the pandemic
of the NDC, that if we allow them, they would definitely have misused it. This is the opportune time. I ask the Minister of Finance to quickly dig his hands in there, take the money, get the money from whatever sources you can, particularly the posterity. Posterity for the purpose of now is now. We are in difficult situations. Let him go for it. Use the money for the purpose for which it's actually intended. Develop the country, not to wait for 100 years, 50 years, when everybody, in this context, we may all be dead.
But your children may be around by then.
But develop the country. You see, Western developed countries, the monies that they had, they use the money to develop this for the purpose of next generations. They keep the money sitting down, yielding no dividend.
Let's look at this bit. There are questions about what government itself is cutting in these difficult times to help shore up the economy, instead of going to the Stabilization Fund, going into the Heritage Fund, going to the IMF. There are questions about the number of ministers. There are questions about expenditures on voter register. And the minority's claim is that we didn't hear some of those specific cost-cutting measures in the minister's.
It's completely unfair. I mean, you look at the situation, the emergencies that we are confronted with now, and you start talking about bits about members of the executive, members of the ministerial portfolio. But what does it mean? See, the logic, there's no logic in it. The logic breaks down. They are talking about people who are going to be unemployed, people who are losing their jobs and all of that. But you're asking our president to dismiss some more. Because this is a matter that is politically has been flawed for over 3 years now. I mean, you use the occasion of this serious national cataclysmic situation to canvass it, to discuss it again. It's absolutely of no use, to no avail, no point, completely pointless. That is not the issue. Let's look at what the situation is now. What is it that can be done? Look at what's happened all over the world. America is talking about revamping the economy by putting in about $2 trillion. Ghana has nothing like $2 trillion. Britain is talking about several billions. Germany, the developed countries, they are trying to bring in some money. Indeed, I hear the last I read, Bank of England, I think, has reduced the base rate to basically nothing. So if we're talking about asking the banks, asking the Bank of Ghana to follow along those lines for the benefit of all the economy, it's a serious situation. I mean, when I was coming this morning, shops are closed down, nobody's. It's a difficulty, but you do not want to score political points the way they are going on. That is not it. This is, we put our shoulders to the wheel and then get it right. We have arrived, this is our destiny. We should be very careful, seriously.
And you are convinced the measures as outlined by the Minister for Finance would make a difference in stemming a possible recession, as has been warned?
Better than doing nothing. I mean, doing absolutely zilch. That's not. Let's try with what we can lay our hands on. Let's give a scratch around for resource. But it's a serious situation, my friend. We agree. Mokola, you can't go to whatever, those around the road, you can't do it. Yesterday I was in Kaswa in the evening. I saw what was going on. You can't do it. It's a difficulty. But let's see what is it that the government can do for the good people of Ghana. But number one, let's try and keep safe. Let's keep alive. They're talking about, they're talking about accountability. Look, we may all be dead by the time accountability comes about.
Isn't that important, even as these amounts are being...
No, not in this context. Let's go full work. Let's do whatever it is. At the end of the day, there is time, there will be opportunity for accountability. For now, let's go. It is an emergency. It's a war situation. No. It's a war situation. I encourage the president, the executive to go. Parliament will give them all the backing. Go out there, use the resources, save the lives of Ghanaians. And then we'll talk about accountability, and we'll talk about a few pennies and whatever. This is not a time to talk about who is going to whatever. I'm challenging them. I have today asked the Parliament, the Finance Committee of Parliament, as I said, to donate my 2 months' salaries, April and May, to the fund established by the president. I'm calling on the members of Parliament, at least senior ones like me, and then those on the minority side. I'm asking them to follow the president's advice, the president's example, the vice president's example, and follow suit instead of just yap. That won't come to anything. Let's contribute physically. Let's contribute an actual resource. Let's make sure that we stand up and fight coronavirus together.
Many thanks for joining us. Katie Hammond is the Member of Parliament for Adanse Asokwa, there with some additional reactions to the minister's statement. So, Gifty, just to answer the specific question you asked earlier about what exactly the stimulus package would look like and whether that's what the finance minister presented earlier today. So, he announced the intention to actually establish that, and we gather that the processes will begin tomorrow. Just to give you the specifics, he disclosed that they are preparing to implement a coronavirus alleviation program, CAP, which is to be funded with an initial amount of 1 billion Ghana cedis as directed by His Excellency the President, and that the the move is to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus situation on households as well as businesses and all. So that's the name of that particular fund that will be becoming the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. So the minister was in Parliament today to announce it in a statement to MPs, and it's expected that from tomorrow going, he will lay a document in Parliament requesting approval for that, and then once that is done, then the resources can then be disbursed to individuals. But he says it's an immediate thing that they're considering as a priority, and they will fast-track the necessary processes to get that particular alleviation fund approved.
Devil is always in the detail. People want to know what's in it for me, what's in it for my business, what's in it for the economy that I, as a member of the Ghanaian populace, will benefit. Joseph, thank you so much for that update there. Joseph Opoku Gakpo, you heard him talk to Katie Hammond there, who is essentially telling the minority to shut up and let's dig into the Heritage Fund. This is the time, he says, we ought to go to that fund. What do you think? Do you agree with him? Do you even agree with the Finance Minister's proposals and the things that he presented to Parliament today? What are your expectations of the Coronavirus Alleviation Program? Share that with us on our WhatsApp platform.